Thank you, Wallace. First of all, I'd like to thank the Dartington Cattle Trust and the Nuffield for my sponsorship, but also having the faith in me to just look at this study topic. It's very non-controversial. Doesn't get much attention anywhere. I'd also take this opportunity to thank my parents and my parents-in-law for carrying on with the day-to-day work while I was off travelling around the country. But more importantly than that, I'd like to thank my wife, Rebecca, and my kids, Harry, Rhys and Thomas, for their support and faith in me to carry out this task. I'd also like to thank John Alvis, who was my mentor, for putting me on the right track on my road. My TB journey started in 2007 when I became the head of TB policy for the Welsh Government. And TB at that stage was in a bad state in Wales. But it actually started with a bullock in a field, a black bullock. On the first week I started my job, I had a phone call. We've got a bullock and it's tested positive for TB. That's all right, that's fine. In 24 hours, that bullock had miraculously turned into a bull and was a Temple bull. That case had some serious media attention. When I drove down that farm with the chief vet and the chief medical officer, we were faced by 4 cameras from Fox News, CNN, BBC, ITV. And what it highlighted was that this was an invisible disease. This animal looked perfectly healthy, but was tested positive for TB. I even had a vet put his hand on the animal's chest and said, "I bet £1 million this animal hasn't got TB." I wish I'd taken that bet. That animal was found to be with TB. So it was quite a journey. During my time at the Welsh Government, we had highs and lows. We saw a reduction in the level of disease. We saw a reduction in the level of overdue tests and things like that. But we also had lows when changes in policies and politicians impacted the road of eradication that we were trying to achieve. And during that period, we had a lot of advice from Australia and New Zealand and tried to eliminate some of their things. I left the Welsh Government in 2013 and became a farmer, so went to the other side. And ironically, within 2 months, we had our first TB breakdown on the farm. And I had to hold a calf in my hand while he was put down as a dangerous contact. So that gave me the other angle of dealing with this disease. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people and met a lot of farmers and vets, but the one thing that's had a profound effect on me was a day on a kitchen table in a house in Carmarthen with 4 burly farmers. Some of them played rugby to a very high standard, some even better than the English current players. But the thing, when they started talking about the impact of TB, and those burly men were in tears, talking about the impact it had on them personally, on them as their family, as the children, on the genetics of their breeding that's gone into that herd, and the future of their business. It had a profound effect. When you see men of that size in tears, it makes you think. And those are the men that inspired me to take this Nuffield journey, and I thank them for that. So the objective of my journey was to look at TB eradication across Europe and see if we could learn from the other people's experience. There's a lot of work being done on what New Zealand and Australia have done, but some of that we cannot do in this country due to legislation, the environment, the type of farming, and the type of consumer. So the first place I went was Switzerland. Switzerland is officially TB-free since 1960. In 1980, they stopped testing for TB, so they only had slaughterhouse surveillance. In 2013, that carcass turned up in an abattoir in Switzerland. It's a cull cow. And when it turned up, nobody knew what it was because they hadn't seen it for many, many years. And that carcass was riddled with TB. From that carcass, they realized that they had, over time, failed to continue to train and educate vets about TB and to train the slaughterhouse people on what to look out for. Linked to that outbreak, there were 7 other outbreaks, and they were mainly due to the cattle going to the alpage in the summer for grazing and mixing with other herds, and that was passed it on to those other herds. The other interesting thing about Switzerland is its borders and the ways he monitored his borders against wildlife and also cattle movements from countries like France. Now, France is a very interesting country. France is currently TB-free, but only just. They're on the verge of the tip of going not officially TB-free. So their difficulty is engaging the farmer and the vets in how important it is to deal with TB at an early stage. If we had continued to deal with TB in the UK in the 1970s, we wouldn't be here today. When it starts to crawl up quietly, it then pounces. In the north, in Côte d'Or, it's a Charolais breeding area. In that area, the farmers are fully engaged. They are desperate to get rid of TB because of the impact on the Charolais breed. In that area, they've been culling badgers within 1 kilometre from the farm or the grazing area where the infected cattle were found. The impact of that was in 2013, they saw a 30% decrease in the disease, and in 2014, a 50% decrease in the level of disease. In the south, in more commercial areas, they're finding it much more difficult to engage with those farmers. But in the north, the sporadic outbreaks are mainly due to cattle movements. Italy is quite unique. It hasn't got a wildlife source of TB infection, and that is mainly because of the way the farms are structured. Majority of the land is used for cropping, and the livestock are kept in through the year. This has allowed them to use cattle controls on a regional by regional basis, and they have seen a progressive approach towards TB eradication, except down in the south. And the reason for that is not because their policies might not be effective, it's because of the social issues. And if you remember the films like The Italian Job, that should answer your question. In Spain, based there is the EU reference laboratory for bovine TB. So that is the main laboratory for TB management and policy and development of tests across Europe. So they work with the laboratories in the UK and other countries. The interesting thing there was you find them developing new tests, such as culturing, which currently takes 6 weeks, and they're working on a test at the moment that will take it down to 48 hours. But the big thing I learned from Spain was the quality of the testing of the cattle. What they found was that the vets were not carrying out the test correctly, either not in the correct place or not measuring or injecting incorrectly. So they went through a massive training package and introduced a huge quality assurance control. And over 2 years, they saw the level of disease in Spain increasing year on year. And it's only now that they think they have the true level of disease. But it highlighted the importance of getting that test done correctly. The other thing they have are high, medium, and low areas, and they target their different policies to fit those areas. So in the high disease areas, for example, they would be testing every 6 months. Let's go forward. Yeah. Ireland. A lot has been said about Ireland. And they've had a lot of positive results in Ireland through badger culling, which has now come to an end. But the interesting thing for me in Ireland was that the link between farmers and government was more of them and us than us working together. And I strongly believe if they had more of us working together, that graph would be even further down the line. They've also now come across the issue of TB in deer in County Wicklow, where the level of disease in deer is up to about 26%. The other interesting element was the way they financed the programme. Farmers pay for the annual test, but government supply hardship grants for people that have lost over 10% of their cattle, or they're also depopulation grants, where they've partially depopulated the herd or fully depopulated. And they have an income supplemental support during a difficult time. Northern Ireland is also a quite difficult area where policy is affected a lot by the political changes in Northern Ireland. But the interesting thing in Ireland is the use of technology. Their APHIS system is fantastic about capturing cattle movements, disease status, test results, everything you need to make an effective eradication policy. They're also trialling the Badger Test Vaccinate Remove project, which is the first of its kind, but they're very keen on keeping their findings quite secret until the end. So it will be interesting to find out the results of that in 2019. But the other person I met with Northern Ireland was Dr. Philip Robinson. And he was a social science, and he used to be a vet. And he looked into the social aspects of TB and why policies hadn't been taken forward and what were the issues that people were holding back. And the one thing that sticks with me that he said was, you need to make TB visible again so people will want to eradicate it. Sweden hasn't got TB. Sweden hasn't got BVD or Jonas or a lot of other diseases. It was an eye-opener to see farmers and consumers understanding the importance of a healthy herd and healthy animals. They introduced a voluntary import scheme that is above the EU level. And all farmers and all importers meet those requirements voluntarily because they do not want to bring disease into the farms. The interesting thing, I took a biosecurity visit with a vet to a farm, dairy farm, and the awareness of that farmer and the keenness to prevent disease coming onto his holding was immense. Another farm I went on in Sweden had designed the farm in an L shape, where all the muck went to the middle and went out through the dirty side of the farm, and they had the clean side of the farm. And they built that buildings all based on limiting the risks to their herds. So some of the key messages from my experiences. So a program requires an understanding of the disease, structure of the industry, and the sociological issues. But that's not just on a national level, that is on a farm level, a local level, a regional level, and a national level. You need to understand what is the differences between these areas. You definitely need a strong communication strategy. The one thing that keeps upsetting me is when, for example, in the Royal Welsh this year, the message that came back from farming unions and on the media was, farmers want a badger cull. Well, I'm a true believer that farmers don't want a badger cull. Farmers want to eradicate TB. And I think the message that we're putting across doesn't give the true impression of what actually impact TB is having. For example, we're currently doing a project in the Gower, and Gower has a lot of common land and had 10 cattle grazers on that common. They now only have 1 cattle grazier on that common. So the impact is more than just that farm. It's the impact on the environment, the fauna, the flora of that common, but also on tourism in the Gower. And I think we need to look at those impacts and try and link our communication with the consumers so they start understanding what the impacts of TB are. We need to use all the tools that are available. I think, example, when I was in Brussels, they said that all the tools that you need are there. You cannot develop an eradication program based on what might come available. You have to base your eradication program over a long period of time using what you have available at this time and amend it as you go forward. The interesting thing, if you don't use all the tools, is it causes problems for an eradication program. For example, in South Wales, when we had an outbreak in a herd and we lost 50% of the cattle were positive, the decision comes for eradication. The correct answer is total depopulation of that farm. But because there was no cull available or anything to do with the wildlife, you had a decision to make. Financially, is the government better off spending 50% more of the money knowing that that disease comes back? But it goes further than that. It's also a moral question. Morally, if you know the disease will come back, are you doing the right thing, culling animals that you know that might be healthy? And the last key message, really, and it's the essential one. Eradication program needs a stable financial and political stability. And this is essential. Without that, you will never eradicate TB. You might control it, you might reduce it, but you will not eradicate it. And I think to eradicate disease, we might need to look at different models of delivering TB eradication and look towards a more industry-driven delivery that takes the decisions away from politicians and gives them a more stable future. So through my experiences through Nuffield, I've learnt a lot. I've met a lot of vets, chief veterinary officers, farmers, politicians, policy advisors, and I've learnt a lot. And I've had the opportunity to share my Nuffield with Leslie Griffiths, which is the Cabinet Secretary for Wales for the Environment, and had a positive feedback from her. But the one thing I've learnt more than anything else is TB is about people. It's about farmers, vets, government, and people working together to achieve eradication. But more than that, TB eradication is important for their today and his future. Thank you very much.